Good evening, Americans, and welcome to the Ed Show tonight from New York. This is MSNBC's continuing coverage of the Egyptian uprising. President Hosni Mubarak of Egypt refuses to resign, and those conducting the largest popular revolt in Egypt's history, well, they're outraged. They've been outraged for 17 days. Protesters say Friday's demonstration will be the largest since the uprising began last month. During his speech tonight, Mubarak remained defiant in the face of worldwide pressure for him to leave his position.
I cannot and will not accept to be dictated orders from outside, no matter what the source is and no matter what the excuses or justifications are.
Okay, I take that as Mubarak saying, United States, just shut up. Mubarak says he's delegated authority to the Vice President, Omar Suleiman. Well, President Obama released a written statement tonight saying, quote, "It's not yet clear that this transition is immediate, meaningful, or sufficient." We're joined tonight by three journalists on the ground in Cairo. They are Barak Barfi, who is the research fellow at the New American Foundation, Ashraf Khalil, a contributor for the Foreign Policy magazine, and Sharif Abdel Quddus, senior producer of Democracy Now! Radio and television. Mr. Barfi, thanks for joining us tonight. We'll start with you. What can we expect tomorrow when the world wakes up to watch Egypt tomorrow, this now being said to be the largest protest tomorrow? What can we expect?
Well, the people here are vexed by Mubarak's latest statement, but they are still adamant that he resign. And tomorrow they are planning to come out in force for the largest protest in the 18 days since this uprising began. They are calling for more than 1 million people to come out and join them in the square. And we're likely to see those type of numbers because, as you know, Ed, Friday is the day of rest. It's the weekend in the Arab world, and people go to the mosques. And after they go to the mosques, they're going to come out in force and be organized and join the protesters in Liberation Square. Ed.
Are the people afraid of the military?
Not at all, Ed. The people think the military is on their side. People are taking pictures with the soldiers and the tanks and the armored personnel carriers. The military is making no efforts to block the protesters to reach Liberation Square. The people believe that the military backs their uprising, Ed.
So why don't they take it all the way to the palace? Is tomorrow the day? You had Hosni Mubarak come out today. There were reports that he was going to step down. Okay, the transitional period, whatever he wants to call it, it goes to Omar Suleiman. But he's still there. And many around the world think that he is still calling the shots. So is he inviting them to be more violent and take this to a new level? What do you think?
We've got to remember that Hosni Mubarak is a cautious and cunning man, to quote the words of Marianne Weaver, an author and journalist that has met him many times. He is very, very precise in what he wants to do. He's running the show. It's very calibrated behind the scenes how he wants to go. Now the ball is in the court of the protesters. They have to decide whether they've had enough and whether they're going to march from the parliament and the presidential palace. They tried organizing these protests in the last few days. They petered out. Tomorrow could be the day where they finally make their big thrust forward, Ed.
The Vice President Suleiman tonight told everyone to go home. I was amazed at this comment. Here it is.
I call on the youth of Egypt, the youth and the heroes of Egypt. Go back home. Go back to your work. The country needs your hands. Let's join hands to build, develop in creativity.
Mr. Barfi, how was that received today by the Egyptian protesters?
The protesters that I spoke to in Liberation Square after Vice President Suleiman's speech were incredulous. They thought that he was taking an arrogant and haughty line. And they have said counted times over the last 18 days that they want to change in government and they won't accept these authoritarian figures telling them what to do anymore. They have no faith in the president here and they have no faith in Suleiman.
All right. Barak Barfi, thanks for joining us tonight. Now let's go to Ashraf Khalil, who is a contributor for the Foreign Policy magazine. Ashraf, thank you for your time tonight. Explain this transfer of power that was announced today. Who's the president? Who's the vice president? Who's on first and second base? And who's calling the shots?
It's a little bit murky, Ed. The President Mubarak made sort of vague mention of transferring some of his powers to Omar Suleiman, the newly appointed vice president. And either way, it's not acceptable to the protesters here in the streets and here in Tahrir. Even if Omar Suleiman becomes the unquestioned president of Egypt, he is not acceptable to a large percentage of these protesters. One man told me earlier tonight that Omar Suleiman has been Mubarak's consigliere. They used that word, consigliere, for the last 15 years. So why would we expect anything different? I mean, they want Mubarak gone, but many people told me tonight that even Mubarak's departure is just step one. They want the whole system reworked. They want to dissolve the parliament. They want to go back from parliamentary elections that were widely decried as fraudulent last fall. They want new elections. They want to choose a new president.
Ashraf, isn't it true that constitutionally, within the rules of their government, he can't turn it over to the vice president? Is that correct?
I believe that is within the letter of the law. But, I mean, I've heard any number of people here, including legal scholars and law professors, say that the Egyptian Constitution has been ignored and monkeyed with so many different times that it's kind of facetious to suddenly be hiding behind constitutional technicalities and legal terms at this point.
It's almost, if you listen closely to President Mubarak and the Vice President Suleiman, it's almost as if they know the protesters have gone as far as they're going to go, and they're not intimidated whatsoever, or maybe they've been given some unbelievable assurances by the military that they don't have anything to worry about. This is Suleiman last week telling ABC News that the protesters' parents should come get them. Here it is.
We will not use any violence against the youth, but we will ask them to go home, and we'll ask their parents to ask them to come home.
So did Hosni Mubarak change his mind at the last minute? How did this come down? The world was reporting that he was going to, step away completely.
Well, first I got to say, I find the comment from Omar Suleiman completely hilarious because I spoke to 3 different people tonight who were there with their parents or parents who were there with their children. So that one's not going to fly. As far as the kind of bait and switch with the resignation, I think that's something that's going to come out in the press in the coming days. I mean, one of the most amazing things about this is that from what the Obama administration was saying before the speech and after the speech, you really got the impression that they thought he was going to say something different. I'm very curious to see what messages were sent from Egypt, from Cairo to Washington before this speech.
Ashraf Khalil, thanks for your time tonight. We now turn to Sharif Abdul Quddus, senior producer of Democracy Now! Radio and television. Sharif, good to have you with us tonight. I appreciate your time as always. What are the protesters telling you about tomorrow?
Well, Ed, I'm standing in Tahrir Square right now. It's after 5 in the morning. There's still thousands of people here, and they plan a massive march tomorrow to fill Tahrir. And not just Tahrir, they plan to walk in the streets of Cairo. You know, a couple of days ago, for the first time, they occupied the street that holds the Parliament building, the People's Assembly building. There's a few hundred marchers after Mubarak's speech walked over to the State TV building, which is a few hundred yards away from where I'm standing right now. Essentially a propaganda arm of the Mubarak regime. There are reports of a few hundred people marching to the presidential palace. And so, as one protester told me, they plan to have the ground of Cairo shake beneath their feet as they take to the streets in numbers that we have not seen yet in this 18-day uprising.
Sharif, you were attacked on the street while you were reporting last week. Are you concerned about another escalation of violence where what media people are left in Cairo are going to be safe, or is this still a dangerous situation for you?
I just want to be clear. I was not attacked. The military approached me once and tried to detain us, but I was not attacked. Many thought that the to the speech would be one of rage and rioting, but it was not. It was an act of defiance. Many hundreds of protesters here took off their shoes in a display of disgust at Mubarak's speech. All the violence that has come from the regime. The protesters here have defended themselves against that violence. But as they continue to remain peaceful, and they plan to march and to make their voices heard tomorrow and to fill the streets of Cairo, as one protester told me, they plan to take Cairo bit by bit if they have to until Mubarak leaves.
Sharif, there was a story printed in the LA Times within the last 24 hours that said that the root of all of this is labor. Did this whole thing start because of labor issues? What do you know about that?
Well, look, this uprising on the 25th was led mainly by the youth generation, what they call the Facebook generation. But one of those groups is called the April 6th Youth Movement. April 6th is the date of a strike in 2008 in Mahalla, a textile factory, a textile city, one of the biggest in the world. 30,000 textile workers went on strike and were brutally suppressed by the regime. That started this wave of protests that ultimately led in this uprising on 25th. Organized labor joined this uprising this week. It's very significant. There are strikes happening across the country right now. I saw tens of thousands of lawyers walk in here today, tens of thousands of doctors in their lab coats walk in here today. So organized labor is very much rooted in this uprising and has now joined in full force and is putting a lot of pressure on Hosni Mubarak right now.
Okay, I want you to elaborate a little bit more on that. This, I think, is very underreported right now, that the root of this is labor, and you say that there are more strikes that are taking place throughout the country, which, of course, was set off by what really happened back in 2008. But this is starting to gain momentum, correct?
Well, this uprising exploded on January 25th, but it has been smoldering for years. And really, I think the protest started beginning after the April 6, 2008 strike in Mahalla by textile factory workers that was suppressed. And now what we've seen after this uprising that was led by the Facebook generation, the youth here, we've seen 6,000 workers of several companies working for the Suez Canal Authority. We've seen 1,500 workers in Mahalla, that same place, strike again. We've seen workers strike out of the Ahram Journalist Building, which is the state's newspaper here. We've seen electrical workers strike. And so now that organized labor has joined, this will put much greater economic pressure on Hosni Mubarak. Already the tourism industry has been greatly affected. The Suez Canal is still operating, but if that is shut down, that'll be very significant. So right now the pressure is only mounting on Hosni Mubarak to step down. Let's remember, he keeps saying he's making concessions. None of these concessions meet even the minimum of demands by the protesters. Yeah. The number one demand is for him to step down.
Sharif Abdel Qaddous, thank you for your report tonight. I appreciate it. Isn't it interesting that all of this arguably started in the Nile Delta over labor issues? President Hosni Mubarak declared that he was handing over powers to the vice president. But that's not nearly enough for the protesters in Egypt. As our coverage continues tonight, the escalating crisis in Egypt. We will cover all of the events. Stay with us. We're right back.